Here's a video on perspective drawing that I'm going to try to break apart the idea of different understanding the different planes or the different faces, the different sides of anything that's box shaped. The more you get into the perspective drawing stuff, the more you realize and accept you're going to have to get confident and come to terms with the idea that pretty much anything can fit in a box, and it's critical to really kind of understand the angles of if something was in a box or started out as a box, which all sorts of things are obviously very box-like. Buildings, couches, etc. That understanding the block is critical, and understanding the edges and the angles of these lines is not a simple thing. So yes, there's vanishing points and all that stuff, but one way that I wish somebody would have said, hey, you should practice this, is to think about these different faces. These represent kind of some of the different ways that a box-like shape could appear depending on where it is and where your eyeballs are. And so the main thing to think about for me is to think about to really sort of think about what you're looking at, and instead of just trying to blindly follow lines to a vanishing point. If this is a box, this edge we know is literally the same height as that edge, and it's parallel up and down, and it's the same height as that edge, which is the same in all of these. In the real world, that's sort of what we know to be true, but because of perspective, and because things that are getting further away are smaller, now this edge is indeed shorter, so that distance is smaller than that distance. And thinking about when you're making these, when you're drawing these boxes, and thinking about what is the closest edge is a very important thing, often called the leading edge. So important that I'm actually going to write it down. And so one way to practice all this stuff and understanding how the different planes, hopefully the term plane doesn't scare you too much, is thinking about how to indicate which edge is closest to me and which edge is somehow further away, and how I'm going to indicate that not only with my vanishing lines, but also just the idea of enhancing that illusion by making clear that not only is this edge, this leading edge, bigger, appearing bigger than this further away edge, that the points that I'm sort of pretending are here, I'm also using the relative size to emphasize that. So a way to practice all these is to think about making some sort of leading edge and making a further away edge, and then connecting those. These lines, when you're trying to figure out how to draw the angles of these lines, can be very confusing. And I know a lot of times I say, well, just make them parallel and then make sure they actually angle in a little bit. That's hard to do if this is all new to you, especially with these. Yeah, so I'm gonna not fuss with that anymore. But to help sort of practice that, I'm just doing these vertical faces, planes. I'm going to talk about the horizontal one in just a sec too. But starting with a leading edge, and it doesn't matter which way, but making an edge that appears smaller, and then connecting those. And it's the angles of these lines are tricky to sort of to feel if they're really actually converging towards each other somewhere. But I'm doing kind of any and all variations that I can sort of think of. I'll do a leading edge, and I'll have a further away edge that's higher. I may have a further away edge that's lower. Still smaller, so it's still going away. And any combination thereof. Sometimes it'll be shorter and sort of in between the height. So you notice sometimes I'm going right and left, just getting comfortable with that as well. Sometimes, I don't think I have one of these. Oh yeah, I do have one of those, but just kind of looking over here at the idea is that you know, this shorter edge can really be placed either on the right or the left. It can start above this point, it can start below this point, it can extend not below this point or below this point or exactly at that point. But as long as this line is shorter and smaller than this first one, then we know because of perspective, there's a cue that is going receding in space. This is farther away from my head than this is. So I feel like that's a good way to practice, because I can practice and be pretty comfortable with making just a pair of parallel lines like that. And then I want to make sure that whichever one is longer, I indicate with big old endpoints. And the one that's shorter and farther away has smaller endpoints. So just getting comfortable with that and just connecting those is really kind of helpful. Because if you were sort of just doing this, trying to draw it freehand, and you have all these other things competing for your attention on which way they're pointing, which angle they're pointing, it is tricky to keep track of all that stuff. So that's one way to practice the vertical edges. And one way to practice these horizontal edges, faces, sides. Here's a bottom side and here's a top side. And these I find to be even trickier than the up and down ones. So one way to practice these, there's obviously myriad ways, is that I will start out with a horizontal line like that. I'm going to make a point here that I'm going to call my leading point. So this is the point that's closest to me. I'm going to start by just sketching in half of this. I'm going to make a little midpoint guide there. And this line, which I'm going to have go through that, I'm going to make sure that the distance of this is more than the distance of this. And then I'm going to put that point there. And then as I connect those, I can be sure, if I've connected them somewhat accurately. Here, this should be angled more like that. See how hard it is? I told you it's hard. That eventually these will be way off in the distance, meeting up. Along the horizon line and vanishing point. But the idea is that if I help myself kind of in a way that I know things will be, I know that in this case the distance of these is smaller. The further away one is shorter than the closer one. But in the horizontal planes, it gets a little bit trickier because that's when things are sort of more things are going away in space, and we don't have anything that's either straight up and down or at least straight side to side. So it's a little bit trickier, but one way that helps me is to just, for this diagonal, make sure I sketch in something where that is a little bit longer, that is a little bit shorter, the distance from there to there is less than the distance from there to there, and then connecting those. I'm doing it again. It's tricky. So practice that, and I'm gonna practice that, truth be told. And know this, all of your horizontal planes are not necessarily gonna line up such that this point and this point are directly across from each other. But this is a good way of practicing drawing this line and trying to make it not quite parallel, but slightly angling in towards this one. And the same for this line. Okay, go practice that, and I will too, and we'll discuss how we did later on. Hopefully it's looking somewhat believable that these would be the top horizontal plane of a box-like object. What I haven't really done is this one, to sort of think about. Let me see, did I do that there? No. Let me try that. If I'm looking up at a horizontal plane, like right here, now I know that this point is the leading point, closest point to me. Midpoint. That distance shorter. So if we were looking up at something, hopefully that's sort of believable. So check that out. Do it a bunch, and know that all these three-dimensional boxes and different orientations, although they don't seem very exciting, are really what is going to help you kind of get more and more comfortable with drawing in perspective. And before you can be comfortable with the boxes, you need to be comfortable with the individual planes of the different boxes, and before you can really be sort of comfortable with the planes, you need to understand the edges and the angles, and before the edges and angles, the points. So go think about all that stuff, practice, and have fun.